While picking up my parents at the airport, I caught my husband, who was supposedly on a crucial business trip in Chicago, passionately kissing his mistress right by the baggage claim. To make matters worse, the woman he was holding was my arrogant white brother-in-law's sister. When I tried to step forward and confront them, my own mother grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin, and hissed at me to keep my mouth shut to save the family face. I was ready to shatter into a million pieces right there on the polished terminal floor. But then my father stepped up behind me, placed a firm, steady hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Sweetheart, let us teach him a lesson he will never forget." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who chose their public image over your broken heart. The bustling environment of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is usually a place of joyful reunions and exciting departures. For me, it became the exact geographical coordinate where my entire reality shattered. I was standing near the international arrivals gate, waiting for my parents, Isaiah and Vivian, to return from a 2-week luxury cruise in the Mediterranean. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, my mother, Vivian, was entirely consumed by respectability politics. To her, image was not just everything, it was the only thing. She was a prominent member of several elite social clubs and the head of the hospitality committee at our megachurch. Her entire life was a carefully curated stage play, and unfortunately, I was the daughter who constantly failed to read her script. I am 32 years old, and by my mother's definition, I am a chronic underachiever. She thinks I am a low-level data entry clerk who barely scrapes by. She constantly compares me to my younger sister Chloe, the family golden child and former sorority queen who married a wealthy, high-powered white attorney named Trent. My mother practically worships Trent. She treats him like royalty because his presence in the family elevates her perceived social status. What my mother does not know, and what I have kept hidden for years, is that I am a highly specialized forensic accountant and the anonymous managing partner of a massive private equity firm. The luxury cruise my parents just returned from was entirely funded by a shell corporation I control, though my mother proudly brags to her church friends that my husband Marcus paid for it. Marcus is 35 years old, an investment director at a mid-tier firm, and the only reason my mother tolerates me. He wears expensive suits, drives a leased luxury car, and knows exactly how to charm my mother by validating her vanity. He was supposed to be in Chicago that afternoon, pitching a new venture capital fund to a group of investors. I had packed his bag myself the night before, ironing his favorite navy blue suit and slipping a sweet note into his briefcase. As I stood near the carousel waiting for my parents to retrieve their luggage, I scanned the massive crowd. My father, Isaiah, caught my eye first. He looked tired from the long flight, but offered me a warm, genuine smile. My father has always been my quiet anchor in a house full of storms. He never bought into my mother's obsession with status, but he kept the peace to keep our home from turning into a battlefield. Right behind him was my mother, Vivian, already complaining loudly about the airport humidity, ruining her silk blouse, and scanning the crowd to see if anyone important was watching her return. I raised my hand to wave them over, but as my arm went up, my peripheral vision caught a flash of that exact custom-tailored navy blue suit I had ironed the night before. I lowered my hand, my breath hitching in my throat. Standing less than 50 feet away from me near a coffee kiosk was Marcus. My brain struggled to process the visual information. He was supposed to be 1,000 miles away in Chicago. I took a tentative step forward, my heart leaping with a sudden naive burst of hope. Perhaps his meetings had ended early. Perhaps he had flown back to surprise me and greet my parents. A bright, genuine smile began to form on my face as I opened my mouth to call out his name. The sound never left my throat. A young, slender woman with long blonde hair wearing a designer silk sundress walked out of the coffee shop carrying 2 iced lattes. She handed one to Marcus, laughed at something he said, and then wrapped her free arm intimately around his neck. Marcus did not flinch. He did not pull away. Instead, he pulled her in by the waist, burying his face in her neck before kissing her passionately on the lips right there in the middle of the terminal. The world tilted on its axis. The ambient noise of thousands of travelers rushing by faded into a dull, echoing ring in my ears. I felt physically sick, a cold sweat breaking out across my neck and shoulders. But the horror did not stop at the betrayal of the kiss. When the woman turned her head slightly to toss her hair over her shoulder, I saw her face clearly. It was Haley. She was 24 years old, an aspiring social media influencer, and the biological sister of Trent, my arrogant brother-in-law. Haley had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt at family gatherings, looking down her nose at my modest clothing and making passive-aggressive comments about my supposed lack of ambition. And now she was in the arms of my husband. My vision blurred with hot, stinging tears. A primal, desperate anger surged through my veins. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march across that polished floor, grab Marcus by the lapels of his expensive suit, and demand an explanation. I took 2 heavy, determined steps forward, my hands curled into fists at my sides. Suddenly, a sharp, manicured hand clamped down on my upper arm with the force of a steel trap. The acrylic nails dug painfully through my sweater and into my skin. It was my mother. She had followed my line of sight and seen exactly what I was seeing. I looked at her expecting to find horror sympathy or maternal rage on my behalf. Instead, her face was twisted into a mask of furious panic directed entirely at me. "Keep your mouth shut, Maya." She hissed, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper directly in my ear. "Do not even think about causing a scene here." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. "Mom, that is Marcus?" I choked out tears spilling down my cheeks. "He is kissing Trent's sister. He lied to me." My mother yanked my arm harder, pulling me behind a large structural pillar to hide us from view. "Stop crying like a crazy woman in public." She spat, her eyes darting around frantically to see if anyone she knew was nearby. "Pastor Thomas and his wife are on our flight. They are right over there by the escalators. If you go over there and start screaming, you will humiliate this entire family. Marcus is a successful man. He is probably just greeting her. Haley is Trent's family, which means she is our family. You need to save face and keep this dignified." I felt as though the floor had completely dropped out from beneath me. My husband was having an affair with a woman who actively mocked me, and my own mother was protecting him to preserve her social standing in front of her church friends. She cared more about the gossiping whispers of strangers than the fact that my heart was being ripped out of my chest. The sheer toxicity of her priorities suffocated me. I stood there paralyzed by the double betrayal, unable to breathe, unable to fight back. Then I felt a heavy, warm presence behind me. My father Isaiah stepped into the space between my mother and me. Without a word, he firmly pried my mother's fingers off my arm, pushing her hand away with a look of quiet, absolute fury that I had rarely seen him direct at her. He turned his back to Vivian, stepping between us to shield me from her toxic glare. He placed both of his large, calloused hands on my shaking shoulders. He did not tell me to calm down. He did not tell me to save face. He pulled me into his chest, letting me hide my tears against his coat. He looked over my shoulder, his eyes locking onto Marcus and Haley in the distance. "Let them put on their little show for now," my father whispered, his voice vibrating with a low, dangerous calm. "Do not give them the satisfaction of your tears today. Dry your eyes, sweetheart. We are going to collect every piece of evidence, and we are going to teach him a lesson he will never, ever forget." His words acted like a bucket of ice water over my panic. The hysterical urge to scream vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated clarity. My father was right. Screaming in an airport would only give my mother a reason to call me unstable. It would give Marcus a chance to formulate a lie. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be ruthless. I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and stepped back. I told my parents I was feeling ill and needed to go home immediately. My mother rolled her eyes, muttering about my inability to handle basic adult situations, but my father simply nodded and told me he would handle their luggage. I walked out of the terminal. The image of Marcus and Haley burned permanently into my retinas. I ordered a private car service and rode back to the luxury penthouse in Buckhead that Marcus and I shared. The ride was a blur of silent tears and hardening resolve. The entire time, my mind raced through financial documents, passwords, and legal structures. Marcus thought he was the primary breadwinner, the man in charge. He had no idea that I held the keys to his entire existence. When I finally unlocked the front door of our penthouse, the scent of his expensive cologne hit me. I walked into the living room. Marcus was sitting comfortably on the leather sofa, his laptop open on the coffee table. He was still wearing the navy blue suit. He looked up when I walked in, immediately putting on a mask of exhausted affection. "Hey babe," he said, standing up and walking over to kiss my forehead. "I just landed from Chicago a little while ago. The traffic from the airport was an absolute nightmare. I missed you so much. How are your parents doing?" I looked into his eyes, marveling at how easily the lie rolled off his tongue. There was no hesitation, no guilt, just the smooth performance of a man who believed he was completely untouchable. I forced the corners of my mouth up, delivering a smile that felt like shattered glass against my lips. "I missed you too," I said softly. "They are doing just fine." As I turned away to hang up my keys, feeling his deceit radiating through the room, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my coat. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text message from my father. I just hacked his iCloud account. "We have everything we need. Check your email." The following Saturday, the Georgia sun was beating down on my parents' sprawling backyard, setting the perfect stage for my mother's extravagant weekend cookout. To call it a cookout was a massive understatement. Vivian did not do casual. There were catered carving stations, crystal pitchers filled with artisan iced tea, and a live jazz acoustic duo playing softly in the corner of the patio. It was exactly the kind of pretentious environment where my family thrived, and where I was expected to fade into the background. My father, Isaiah, and I exchanged a brief knowing glance across the manicured lawn. Over the past 48 hours, we had barely slept. The iCloud backup my father hacked had been a treasure trove of absolute filth. We had uncovered a digital mountain of explicit photos, sickeningly sweet text messages, and hotel receipts detailing every moment Marcus and Haley had spent together behind my back. But the most crucial pieces of the puzzle were still missing. We needed more financial data. Until we had it, my father and I had agreed to play our parts perfectly. I stood by the beverage station, wearing a simple sundress, playing the role of the quiet, unassuming wife. Marcus was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. He wore a crisp designer polo, charming my mother's country club friends, laughing loudly, and playing the role of the devoted, successful son-in-law. Every time he casually draped his arm around my waist, my skin crawled with revulsion. I had to force myself not to physically recoil from his touch, remembering the smell of Haley's perfume that had lingered on his collar just days before. The atmosphere shifted the moment my sister Chloe and her husband Trent arrived. Trent drove his pristine silver Porsche right up the driveway, parking it where everyone could admire it. Chloe stepped out looking like she had just left a magazine photo shoot. Trent walked beside her with that trademark arrogant swagger of his, an entitled white man who believed his presence alone was a gift to our family. My mother immediately abandoned her guests to fawn over them, kissing Trent on both cheeks and loudly complimenting Chloe's designer outfit. We all gathered around the massive teakwood dining table under the patio awning. The conversation quickly shifted, as it always did, to money, status, and accomplishments. Trent dominated the discussion, boasting about a massive corporate merger his law firm had just closed. My mother hung on his every word, nodding enthusiastically and shooting me pointed looks, silently demanding that I take notes on what true success looked like. Trent took a slow, deliberate sip of his expensive bourbon and turned his gaze directly toward me. His eyes were cold, filled with that familiar condescension I had endured for years. "You know, Maya, you really need to learn how to be a proper wife," like Chloe, Trent said loudly, ensuring the entire table fell silent to listen. "Look at Marcus. He is out there grinding every single day. Marcus is carrying this whole house on his shoulders. Meanwhile, you are playing around with spreadsheets, counting pennies at that little data entry job of yours. It is not exactly helping him build a legacy. You should hand over whatever little paycheck you get to Marcus. Let a real financial expert manage your money before you waste it." My mother nodded in vigorous agreement. "Trent is absolutely right, Maya. A wife should be a reflection of her husband's success, not a burden holding him back. I looked at Marcus, waiting to see if the man I had married would defend me. Instead, Marcus offered a fake long-suffering sigh and gave Trent a subtle nod of solidarity, as if he were a martyr bravely carrying the dead weight of a useless wife. Chloe laughed, a high musical sound that grated against my eardrums. She dramatically raised her left hand, catching the sunlight to blind everyone with her new jewelry. "Trent just gets it," she boasted, wiggling her fingers. "He surprised me with this 5-carat diamond upgrade just because it was a Tuesday. He knows how to treat a woman who knows her place." Chloe then turned her sharp gaze to me, her smile dropping into a mask of fake pity. "Maybe if you focused more on being a traditional wife instead of stressing over your little office job, you could finally give Marcus a baby. Everyone knows financial stress is terrible for fertility. It is honestly sad that Marcus has to come home to a sterile house after working so hard for you." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother took a slow sip of her wine, clearly approving of the brutal insult. It was the lowest possible blow. They all knew about my supposed fertility struggles. They knew how many nights I had spent crying over negative tests. Using that vulnerability as a weapon to humiliate me in public was a new level of depravity even for my sister. I gripped the edge of the teakwood table so hard my knuckles turned white. The irony of their insults was almost too heavy to bear. They thought I was a broke, struggling clerk. They had absolutely no idea that I was the anonymous managing partner of Apex Capital. I was a specialized forensic accountant who navigated global corporate acquisitions before breakfast. I made more money in a single week than Trent made in an entire year at his firm. I owned the luxury penthouse Marcus lived in. I funded the cars, the vacations, and the lifestyle they all so desperately worshipped. But I had kept my wealth concealed behind layers of blind trusts and corporate entities, wanting a life built on genuine love rather than financial exploitation. Now, sitting among these shallow, cruel people, I realized my humility had been a mistake. But I refused to break character. I looked directly at Chloe, forcing a serene, unbothered smile to my lips. "You are right, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. "Marcus works incredibly hard behind closed doors. And Trent, I am sure you know exactly how to manage family assets. I will definitely keep your advice in mind." Trent smirked, satisfied that he had put me in my place, and turned his attention back to his bourbon. My father Isaiah shot me a look of fierce pride from across the table. He knew exactly what kind of restraint it took for me not to obliterate them with the truth right then and there. Needing a moment to breathe and escape the suffocating toxicity of the patio, I stood up and offered to clear the appetizer plates. I stacked the empty dishes and carried them into the massive kitchen. The house was quiet inside, a stark contrast to the loud, boastful chatter echoing from the backyard. After setting the plates by the sink, I gathered the empty wine bottles to take them out to the recycling bins on the side of the house. The recycling bins were hidden behind a tall, thick row of manicured cedar hedges, creating a blind spot from the main patio. As I pushed the heavy side door open and stepped onto the paved walkway, the distinct smell of expensive cigar smoke drifted toward me. I paused, keeping my footsteps light. Hidden from view by the thick cedar branches, I could hear two distinct voices. It was Trent and Marcus. They had slipped away from the main party and were standing near the edge of the property, their voices lowered in what they thought was complete privacy. I pressed my back against the brick wall of the house, holding my breath, and listened. "Are we clear on the offshore transfers?" Trent asked, his arrogant tone completely replaced by a tense, urgent whisper. "My family's trust fund auditors are starting to ask annoying questions. They are reviewing the quarterly disbursements. I need that cash washed and routed back into my clean accounts by the end of the month. If the board finds out I have been skimming from the primary trust, I am ruined." I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Trent, the high and mighty attorney who had just lectured me on legacy and finance, was actively embezzling from his own family's trust fund. "Relax," Trent, Marcus replied, his voice dripping with that smooth, unearned confidence I used to love. "I funneled the latest batch of your money through the dummy LLCs just like we planned. It went through 3 different international accounts before hitting the domestic shell company. The money is spotless. The auditors will never trace it back to you." I squeezed my eyes shut, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly snapping into place. Marcus was not just a cheating husband. He was actively laundering embezzled money for my brother-in-law. He was using his position at his investment firm to clean stolen cash. The sheer magnitude of their arrogance was staggering. But Marcus was not finished talking. I even used a huge chunk of that cleaned cash to close on the new property yesterday. Marcus continued, a sickeningly proud chuckle escaping his throat. It is completely off the books. What property? Trent asked sharply. You better not be drawing attention to the funds right now. I am not an idiot, Marcus shot back. It is the penthouse in Midtown. The deed is buried under 3 layers of corporate shielding, legally owned by a ghost company. I bought it for Haley. She was getting tired of her apartment, and she deserves a place that matches her aesthetic. Do not worry about Maya. She is completely clueless. She thinks I'm just working late to pay off our mortgage. She literally ironed my suit for me before I flew out to see your sister. The air vanished from my lungs. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was spinning rapidly out of control. Marcus had taken the money he was laundering for Trent and used it to secretly buy a luxury penthouse for Haley. He was using Trent's stolen family money to fund a secret life with Trent's own biological sister, all while living in the penthouse that I secretly owned and paid for. The twisted, incestuous web of their financial and moral corruption was almost too complex to believe. I stood there in the shadows, my fingernails digging into the brick wall so hard they threatened to break. My husband was a fraud. My brother-in-law was a thief. My sister was a cruel, vain enabler, and my mother was the oblivious ringmaster of this entire circus of deceit. They thought they had me trapped in a corner. They thought I was a pathetic, weak woman who would just lower her head and take their abuse. I pulled my phone from my dress pocket and opened a secure, encrypted messaging app that connected directly to my elite team of forensic analysts at Apex Capital. My hands were no longer shaking. The tears were completely gone, replaced by a ruthless, burning desire to see them all burn to the ground. I typed a single decisive message to my lead investigator. Initiate a full forensic trace on Trent's family trust fund. Track every offshore transfer connected to Marcus. Find the deed to a new penthouse in Midtown. I want every single financial crime documented and ready for the FBI. We are taking them all down. I hit send and slipped my phone back into my dress pocket. Taking a slow and steadying breath, I stepped out from the shadows of the cedar hedges and walked back to the sunlit patio as if absolutely nothing had changed. The acoustic jazz duo was still playing their upbeat melodies. My mother was still laughing entirely too loudly at one of Trent's arrogant jokes. Marcus was still playing the role of the devoted, successful husband, handing out expensive cigars to the other men. I picked up a tray of empty crystal glasses and walked past them, my expression completely blank and unreadable. They looked at me and saw a subservient, defeated wife clearing the table. They had absolutely no idea they were looking at the architect of their impending destruction. The very next morning, I drove to my father Isaiah's architectural firm in downtown Atlanta. His office was a quiet sanctuary of rolled blueprints and drafting tables, a safe haven far away from my mother's prying eyes. He locked the heavy oak door and pulled the blinds shut the moment I arrived. I opened my laptop and logged into the highly secure encrypted server of Apex Capital. My lead investigator had worked tirelessly through the night, and the files were waiting for us. My father pulled up the leather chair beside me, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. We opened the first digital folder. It contained the complete forensic tracing of Trent's family trust fund. The data was glaringly obvious to an expert eye. Trent had been systematically siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars from his wealthy relatives, routing the stolen money through an intricate maze of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Marcus, utilizing his high-ranking position as an investment director, had set up multiple dummy corporations to catch those stolen funds. He was washing the cash clean through fabricated consulting fees and funneling it right back into Trent's personal domestic accounts. They were both actively committing massive federal offenses. But the financial crimes were just the beginning. I clicked on the real estate dossier my team had compiled. The deed to the Midtown penthouse was buried beneath a complex labyrinth of limited liability companies. However, corporate restructuring and forensic accounting are my exact specialties. I stripped away the layers of legal shielding in less than 10 minutes. The property was purchased entirely in cash for $3.2 million. The primary resident listed on the luxury building's private security registry was Haley. Marcus had used Trent's own stolen money to buy a multi-million-dollar love nest for Trent's younger sister. Then my eyes caught a specific detail at the bottom of the closing documents that made the blood run entirely cold in my veins. I zoomed in on the brokerage fee section. The listing agent who facilitated this massive off-the-books cash transaction had pocketed a staggering 6% commission. The digital signature on the broker line belonged to Chloe, my own sister. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart turning to solid ice. Chloe had processed the sale. She had personally walked Haley and Marcus through that luxury penthouse. She had smiled, collected a commission check for nearly $200,000, and then come to my house just yesterday to insult my job and mock my painful struggles with fertility. She knew. She knew absolutely everything. My father slammed his fist against the drafting table, the sudden violent noise echoing sharply in the quiet office. He looked physically sick to his stomach. His own daughter had sold out her sister for a commission check. If Chloe knew, I said, my voice eerily calm in the silent room, Mom definitely knew. Chloe tells Mom every single detail of her life. Mom has been protecting Marcus not just because he looks good on paper, but because this entire toxic arrangement financially benefits her golden child. They traded my marriage, my dignity, and my sanity for a real estate commission and a boost in social status. My father looked at me. His eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of deep sorrow and fierce, unwavering resolve. He placed his large hand over mine. They chose money and vanity over blood, Maya. We do not owe them a single ounce of mercy. I did not have to wait long for my mother to make her next move. Just 2 days later, Vivian summoned me to her house under the guise of needing help organizing a charity luncheon for her country club. When I arrived, there were no luncheon menus or seating charts in sight. Instead, she was sitting at the head of her formal dining table with a thick stack of legal documents spread out before her. Marcus was standing right behind her chair, looking solemn and wearing his best counterfeit smile. "Have a seat, Maya," my mother ordered, not bothering to offer a greeting or offer me a glass of water. I sat across from them, keeping my face perfectly neutral, masking the disgust that threatened to rise in my throat. Marcus pushed a silver luxury pen across the polished mahogany wood toward me. "Maya," Babe Marcus started, adopting his smooth, persuasive sales voice. "I just got an incredible opportunity. I have the chance to buy into a massive commercial real estate venture. It is a guaranteed return. But I need to liquidate some assets quickly to secure my spot. I need you to sign this paperwork to leverage our penthouse for a short-term business loan." I stared at the papers. He wanted me to sign a second mortgage on the penthouse I had anonymously purchased and placed in a trust for us. He wanted to drain the equity from our home to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. I looked at my mother. "You agree with this?" I asked quietly. My mother crossed her arms, glaring at me with absolute disdain. "Of course I agree. Marcus is a financial visionary. He is trying to build a legacy for this family, and you are sitting there hesitating. A good wife supports her husband's ambitions unconditionally. You should be grateful he is allowing you to be part of this investment. If you refuse to sign those papers and ruin this deal for him, I will personally disown you. I will not have a selfish, unsupportive daughter dragging down a successful man." The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. She was willing to cut me out of her life completely if I did not hand over my financial security to a man who was sleeping with her favorite son-in-law's sister. I looked down at the documents. The old Maya, the daughter desperate for her mother's love and approval, would have cried. She would have signed the papers just to keep the peace. But that woman died on the floor of the Atlanta airport. I picked up the pen. "I need to read through the terms tonight," I said softly, casting my eyes downward to play the role of the intimidated wife, "just to make sure I understand where to sign. I will bring them back to you first thing tomorrow morning." Marcus looked highly annoyed by the delay, shifting his weight impatiently. My mother waved her hand with an arrogant scoff. Fine. Read your little documents, but have them signed and returned by tomorrow morning. Do not test my patience, Maya. Do not make me regret defending you. I took the thick folder, stood up, and walked out of her immaculate house. The moment the heavy front door clicked shut behind me, a dark, genuine smile spread across my face. They thought they were forcing a naive, financially illiterate woman into a corner. They had no idea they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them all. I drove straight to my private office at Apex Capital. I locked the door, spread the loan documents across my expansive glass desk, and went to work. I did not just read the terms, I rewrote them. Using my elite background in forensic accounting and corporate law, I carefully drafted a highly complex addendum and buried it deep within the dense legal jargon of page 47. It was a specialized, incredibly lethal cross-default clause. I legally tied the home equity loan directly to Trent's corporate law firm and Marcus's primary investment portfolios, naming them as the ultimate collateral guarantors. I structured the legal language so seamlessly that the bank would accept it without question. The clause dictated that the moment this specific loan went into default, it would automatically trigger an immediate, catastrophic default across all of Trent's corporate accounts and freeze the entirety of his family trust fund. I tied Marcus's financial survival directly to Trent's stolen money. If one domino fell, the entire house of cards would instantly catch fire and burn to ash. The next morning, I walked into Marcus's home office holding a cup of coffee. I handed him the signed, notarized documents with a perfect, submissive smile. He barely glanced at the pages, his eyes lighting up with greed, before shoving them into his leather briefcase. He kissed my cheek, completely unaware that he had just accepted a ticking time bomb. The trap was officially set. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to light the match. 2 days after Marcus blindly signed his own financial death warrant, my sister Chloe hosted her highly anticipated spring high tea. The event was held at her sprawling French provincial estate in Buckhead, a property heavily subsidized by my parents, and as I now knew, padded by dirty real estate commissions. The entire afternoon was designed to be a spectacular display of Southern wealth and passive-aggressive social warfare. I arrived right on time, wearing a modest pastel dress, ready to play the oblivious, long-suffering wife one last time. The back terrace was transformed into an overly curated wonderland of pink peonies, fine bone china, and silver-tiered stands loaded with delicate pastries. A dozen of Atlanta's most insufferable society wives milled about, balancing crystal flutes of vintage champagne and gossiping behind perfectly painted smiles. I stood near a massive floral arrangement, politely sipping Earl Grey tea and observing the absolute hypocrisy of the women around me. Then the true guest of honor arrived. Chloe clapped her hands together in exaggerated delight as Haley stepped onto the terrace. Trent's younger sister was a striking manufactured beauty, dripping in designer labels from head to toe. She carried an air of supreme entitlement, tossing her blonde hair and greeting the women as if she were royalty. My stomach tightened, not out of jealousy, but out of sheer, unadulterated disgust. This was the woman sleeping in the penthouse I technically owned, funded by the money my husband was illegally washing. Chloe immediately looped her arm through Haley's, parading her around the terrace before bringing her directly over to where I was standing. The predatory glint in my sister's eyes was impossible to miss. She had orchestrated this exact moment. She wanted to humiliate me in front of my husband's mistress, fully aware of the sickening secret they all shared. "Maya, look who finally made it!" Chloe sang out, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding women. "You remember Trent's little sister Haley, right? She just closed on a fabulous new property in Midtown. We are absolutely thrilled for her." Haley looked me up and down, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She adjusted the massive diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet on her wrist. A bracelet I immediately recognized from a receipt on Marcus's secret credit card statement. "It is so nice to see you, Maya." Haley purred, her tone laced with poorly concealed pity. "Chloe tells me you have been working such long hours at your little data job. You look utterly exhausted. You really should take better care of yourself. Marcus must hate coming home to someone who is always so stressed and drained. Several women nearby stopped their conversations, turning their heads to listen in on the drama. Chloe took a sip of her champagne, her eyes dancing with malicious joy. "Well, you know how it is, Haley," Chloe chimed in, projecting her voice to ensure maximum humiliation. "Some women just do not understand how to balance a household. It takes a certain kind of finesse to keep a successful man like Marcus happy. If a wife lets herself go or forgets her primary duties, she really cannot be surprised when a man starts looking for a softer, more accommodating place to land." The sheer audacity of the insult hung heavily in the humid Georgia air. They were practically spelling out the affair to my face, using my supposed inadequacies to justify Marcus's blatant infidelity. Haley giggled, adjusting the strap of the handbag resting on her forearm. "Exactly," Haley agreed, batting her eyelashes innocently. "A man needs a sanctuary. He needs a woman who knows how to pamper him, not someone obsessed with paying bills. Honestly, there are some women who just do not know how to keep their husbands. It is a tragedy, really, but a man has needs." They waited for me to break. I could see the anticipation in their eyes. They expected tears. They expected me to flee to the bathroom or excuse myself in a flurry of embarrassment. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the weak, pathetic Maya crumble under the weight of their combined cruelty. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The porcelain teacup did not even rattle against the saucer as I lowered it. I let the silence stretch for a few agonizing seconds, allowing my complete lack of reaction to unsettle them. The smug smiles on their faces began to falter just slightly as I looked at them with absolute predatory calm. I stepped forward, closing the distance between Haley and me. I did not look at her face. Instead, I directed my gaze entirely to the handbag slung over her arm. "That is a stunning Hermes Birkin," I said, my voice smooth, loud, and carrying a tone of absolute chilling authority. "The porous crocodile skin is quite rare. I have to admit I am incredibly impressed, Haley." Haley blinked, thrown off balance by the unexpected compliment. She puffed out her chest, reclaiming her arrogant smirk. "Thank you, Maya. It was a gift. Someone very special wanted to make sure I had the absolute best." I smiled warmly, locking eyes with her. "It is magnificent," I continued, my words dripping like liquid nitrogen. "Though I am a bit curious about the logistics. I have heard the wait lists for that specific exotic leather are nearly impossible to bypass locally. In fact, my colleagues in finance always joke that to secure a bag like that directly from a private dealer so quickly you have to bypass domestic tracing entirely. I heard you have to pay with a Cayman Islands bank account just to get one of those." The air vanished from the terrace. Haley's mouth fell open, her face draining of all color in a matter of seconds. The smug, triumphant glow instantly shattered, replaced by a look of stark, paralyzed terror. She dropped her arm, trying to pull the bag behind her back, as if it were suddenly burning her skin. Chloe choked on her champagne, coughing violently into her napkin. Her eyes darted wildly toward me, wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. The sudden shift in their demeanor was electric. The words, "Cayman Islands bank account," were the exact trigger phrase that connected Trent's embezzled trust fund directly to Marcus's offshore laundering accounts. In one single, perfectly aimed sentence, I had let them know that their impenetrable vault of secrets was wide open. I did not raise my voice. I did not drop my smile. I simply stood there in my modest pastel dress, holding my teacup, with the effortless grace of an apex predator cornering its prey. "But I am sure a smart, independent girl like you understands all about complex offshore transactions," I added softly, letting the threat hang heavy between them. After all, maintaining a sanctuary in a midtown penthouse requires a very specific kind of financial finesse. "Do you not agree, Chloe?" Chloe looked like she was going to be physically sick. Her hands trembled so violently that her crystal champagne flute clinked loudly against her diamond rings. Haley took a stumbling step backward, looking at me as if I had just grown horns. They were entirely stripped of their power, realizing in real time that the woman they had spent years mocking held their absolute destruction in the palm of her hand. The other society ladies, unaware of the criminal context, but sensing the immediate suffocating tension, fell completely silent. The jazz duo playing in the corner seemed deafeningly loud. "Well," I said, placing my teacup gently on a passing waiter's silver tray. "This has been a truly enlightening afternoon, Chloe. Your hospitality is exactly what I expected, but I am afraid I must get going. I have some very pressing administrative tasks to handle. You know how boring my little data entry job can be." I turned on my heel and walked across the terrace. I did not rush. My posture was perfectly straight, my steps measured and calm. Behind me, the silence was absolute. No one spoke a single word as I glided through the French doors and walked out through the immaculate marble foyer of Chloe's mansion. As I reached the grand circular driveway and unlocked my car, I pulled my phone from my purse. The screen glowed, displaying a highly detailed, comprehensive email my father and I had drafted the night before. The email contained an anonymous, heavily encrypted data packet. Inside the packet were the undeniable forensic proofs of Trent's offshore wire transfers, the dummy corporation set up by Marcus, and the massive ethical violations committed by Trent as a licensed attorney stealing from his own family's trust. It was addressed directly to the Chief Investigative Counsel of the State Bar Legal Ethics Committee, carbon copied to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. I slid into the driver's seat, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace wash over me. I stared at the mansion one last time, picturing Chloe and Haley trembling on the terrace, their perfect fake lives beginning to crack at the foundation. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I pressed send. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I went to my fake data entry job, smiled at my coworkers, and returned home each evening to play the role of the devoted, oblivious wife. But beneath the surface, the digital trap I had set was rapidly tightening its jaws. My father kept me updated from his secure servers. The ethics complaint had struck like a lightning bolt. The Oversight Committee had immediately flagged the catastrophic anomalies in Trent's escrow accounts. My brilliantly disguised cross-default clause had triggered a massive automated red flag within the banking system, freezing not only the offshore routing accounts, but the entirety of Trent's pristine family trust fund. The fallout hit our house on a Thursday night. Rain was lashing against the windows of our suburban home, mirroring the absolute chaos unfolding inside. Marcus had been pacing the hardwood floors for hours, a glass of scotch clutched tightly in his trembling hand. He had not eaten dinner. His phone had been ringing incessantly, displaying encrypted numbers he frantically sent to voicemail. His perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess, and the smooth, arrogant confidence he normally wore had completely evaporated. I sat calmly on the plush living room sofa, flipping through a lifestyle magazine, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. I watched him sweat, savoring every single drop of his mounting terror. Suddenly, someone began pounding on our heavy oak front door. It was not a polite knock. It was frantic, violent, desperate hammering that rattled the door frame. Marcus jumped, spilling scotch onto the expensive Persian rug. He hesitated, his eyes wide with genuine fear, before slowly walking over to unlock the deadbolt. Trent shoved his way inside before the door was even fully open. The high-powered, arrogant attorney who had mocked me at the cookout was entirely gone. In his place stood a frantic, hyperventilating mess of a man. Trent's designer suit was soaked with rain and severely wrinkled. His face was flushed a blotchy, uneven red, and his eyes darted wildly around our foyer. "It is frozen!" Trent screamed, grabbing Marcus by the lapels of his shirt and shoving him against the hallway wall. "Every single account is frozen. The Bar Association showed up at my office this morning with a court order. The federal investigators have locked down the family trust. I cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now," Marcus stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to pacify the enraged lawyer. "Trent, lower your voice. Maya is right there in the living room. You need to calm down." "I do not care who is in the living room," Trent roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Someone tipped them off. Someone sent the ethics board a complete forensic breakdown of the offshore routing. They have the shell company names Marcus. They have the wire transfer receipts. They know exactly how much cash is missing from my family's fund. I need that money back right now. You need to wire the clean cash back into my domestic accounts so I can balance the ledger before the auditors file federal charges. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. His chest heaved as he desperately pushed Trent away, smoothing down his ruined shirt. I cannot do that, Trent. You know I cannot do that. What do you mean you cannot do that? Trent hissed, stepping forward menacingly. That was our agreement. You clean the money, you hold it, and you send it back when I give the signal. Send the money back, Marcus. I cannot, Marcus yelled back, running a trembling hand over his face. The cash is not liquid anymore. I told you this. I tied it up in the Midtown property. The penthouse closing took all of the reserved funds. If I try to sell that property right now, the feds will instantly trace the deed directly to Haley. It will prove everything. They will arrest both of us. Trent staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. He grabbed his own hair, pacing in a tight, frantic circle on the foyer tiles. You spent my stolen money on a luxury apartment for my sister, and now we are both going to federal prison. You absolute idiot. We need cash. We need liquid cash to retain defense counsel and bribe the auditors to look the other way. Marcus's wild, panicked eyes suddenly darted away from Trent and locked directly onto me. I sat perfectly still on the sofa, keeping my expression entirely blank, playing the terrified, confused wife, witnessing a business dispute she did not understand. But I saw the exact moment Marcus made his cowardly decision. He was going to throw me into the fire to save himself. Maya, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a sickeningly desperate tone as he rushed over to the sofa. Maya listened to me carefully. The business deal I told you about, the one we needed the second mortgage for, it went bad. Really bad. We cannot just take a loan anymore. We have to sell this house. I blinked, feigning utter shock. Sell the house, Marcus. What are you talking about? This is our home. We do not have a choice, he shouted, dropping to his knees in front of me and grabbing my hands. Trent is in trouble. I am in trouble. If we do not generate a massive amount of cash by tomorrow morning, I could lose my firm. I could lose my license. You have to sign the emergency liquidation papers. I can call a cash buyer right now. They will buy the property for 70 cents on the dollar, but we will have the money by tomorrow. You need to sign the deed over to me right now. I slowly pulled my hands out of his sweaty grasp. I am not selling my home, Marcus. I told you I am not comfortable with these erratic financial decisions. You are acting crazy. Before Marcus could scream at me again, the front door flew open for a second time. My mother, Vivian, stormed into the foyer, bringing a gust of cold wind and rain with her. She had clearly rushed over straight from a social event, still wearing a sequined evening gown and a dripping trench coat. Chloe had obviously called her in a panic when Trent left their estate in a rage. Vivian took one look at the scene, Trent hyperventilating by the door, Marcus begging on his knees, and me sitting calmly on the sofa, and instantly assessed the situation with her usual toxic bias. She marched directly into the living room, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. What is the meaning of this? Vivian demanded, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. Chloe called me, crying hysterically, because Trent is facing a minor business audit. Marcus just told you what needs to be done to fix this. Why are you sitting there arguing with your husband when our family is in crisis? Mom, he wants to sell our house, I said, maintaining my flawless facade of a distressed daughter. He wants to sell the roof over my head to bail out Trent. I am not doing it. Vivian scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as a defective piece of property that was malfunctioning. You will do exactly as your husband tells you. Vivian snapped, her eyes narrowing with absolute contempt. This is not about your little house. This is about family legacy. Do you have any idea what is at stake here? Trent is facing an audit that could temporarily embarrass us. Trent brings class to this family. He brings prestige, wealth, and connections that you could not even dream of comprehending. I looked at Trent, who was currently leaning against my hallway wall, looking like a cornered rat facing a long prison sentence. Class, I repeated softly, letting just a fraction of my true cold demeanor bleed into my voice. You think stealing from your own family trust fund is class? The room went dead silent. Marcus stopped breathing. Trent's eyes bulged out of his head. Vivian stared at me, completely caught off guard by my sudden shift in tone. They had not expected me to understand the nature of their crisis. They thought I was too stupid to grasp the concept of corporate embezzlement. "You shut your mouth!" Vivian hissed, taking a threatening step toward the sofa. "You know absolutely nothing about high-level finance. You are just a lowly, pathetic clerk. Marcus is trying to save his career and protect your sister's husband. You will sign whatever documents he puts in front of you, and you will do it right now. Or I swear to God, Maya, I will erase you from this family permanently." I stood up slowly, matching her height. I smoothed down the front of my dress, looking my mother directly in the eyes. "I am not signing anything, Vivian. And Marcus is not saving anyone. He is just trying to cover up the fact that he used Trent's stolen money to buy a multi-million-dollar penthouse for Trent's little sister." Marcus let out a strangled, pathetic sound. Trent violently pushed himself off the wall, staring at Marcus with renewed, murderous rage. But Vivian did not look at them. She looked only at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her golden son-in-law was exposed. Her perfect family image was cracking, and she blamed me for refusing to sweep it under the rug. Vivian lunged forward. Her hand swung through the air with vicious speed. The sharp crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed like a gunshot through the living room. The force of the slap snapped my head to the side, my hair falling across my face. "Trent is the man who brings class to this family!" Vivian screamed, her voice shrill and completely unhinged. "You are nothing, you hear me? You are just an uneducated, useless brat who cannot even give her husband a child. You will obey us." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the heavy rain pounding against the glass doors. Marcus took a step back, terrified of the violence. Trent stood frozen, watching me. I slowly turned my head back to face my mother. I did not raise my hand to my stinging cheek. I did not shed a single tear. I ran my tongue along the inside of my mouth, tasting the sharp metallic tang of copper. A small drop of blood trickled down the corner of my lip. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. The pathetic daughter who craved her love was officially dead. The apex predator was all that remained. I smiled, a chilling, terrifying expression that made Vivian take an involuntary step backward. "Your class is about to hit the front pages." I did not wait for Vivian to process my words. I turned on my heel and walked out of my own house, leaving the front door wide open to the pouring rain. I climbed into my car and drove away without a single backward glance, the sting on my cheek serving as a permanent reminder of why I could never show these people mercy. I booked a suite at a downtown hotel under an assumed name, turned off my personal phone, and slept better than I had in a decade. The next 48 hours were a blur of absolute devastation for the golden children of our family. The Legal Ethics Committee did not just freeze Trent's accounts. They launched a full-scale, highly publicized investigation. Whispers of embezzlement and federal wire fraud bled out of closed-door meetings and into the elite social circles of Atlanta. Trent's prestigious law firm placed him on immediate, indefinite administrative leave. Marcus's investment firm, alerted by the sudden cross-default freeze on his portfolios, initiated an internal audit of his trades. The walls were closing in on them, and the oxygen in their pristine manufactured world was rapidly running out. Panic breeds desperation, and desperation breeds catastrophic mistakes. On Saturday morning, my father met me at a quiet, secluded coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. Isaiah looked like he had aged 5 years in 2 days. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his hands, usually so steady at the drafting table, trembled slightly as he set a thick manila folder on the table between us. "What is this, Dad?" I asked gently, keeping my voice low. He looked at me, his eyes hollowed out by a betrayal so profound it defied logic. "Your mother," he said, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and simmering rage. "She emptied it, Maya. Every single cent." I opened the folder. Inside were stamped certified banking statements from my father's primary retirement accounts. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $2.5 million. Gone. wiped out in a series of unauthorized emergency wire transfers executed late Friday afternoon. Chloe went to her crying, Isaiah explained, staring blindly at his untouched coffee. She told Vivian that Trent was the victim of a malicious smear campaign, that the feds had frozen their assets illegally, and that they would lose their estate by Monday if they did not have immediate liquid cash to retain a crisis management firm and satisfy Marcus's creditors. Chloe begged her. She manipulated her. And Vivian, without a single word to me, bypassed our dual authorization protocols and drained the retirement funds I spent 35 years building. She gave my life savings to a thief just to maintain her daughter's social standing. A cold, dark fury settled deep in my bones. Vivian had slapped me to defend a criminal, but stealing my father's future was an unforgivable sin. She had sacrificed the man who loved and provided for her just to keep up appearances. "Dad," I whispered, reaching across the table to grip his hand. "I am so sorry." "Do not be sorry," Maya, Isaiah said, his gaze suddenly hardening into sharp, uncompromising steel. He tapped the folder with a blunt finger. "The routing numbers on those transfers show exactly where the money went. Vivian wired it directly into a dummy holding account controlled by Marcus. They are trying to use my money to patch the bleeding holes in Trent's escrow accounts. They are trying to wash it clean. I want you to take these documents and bury them all. Do not leave them a single penny." I slid the folder into my briefcase. "You have my word." By Monday afternoon, I returned to my house to gather a few remaining personal items. The atmosphere inside was tense, smelling of stale coffee and desperation. I was halfway up the stairs when Marcus stepped out of his home office. He looked ragged, his tie undone, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. Yet when he saw me, he immediately plastered on a mask of forced, condescending affection. The sociopathic ease with which he could switch personalities was terrifying. "Maya." "Thank God you are here," Marcus said, rushing forward to grab my hands. I pulled back slightly, maintaining a terrified, subdued expression. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair, playing the role of the exhausted martyr perfectly. "Listen to me, babe." He started, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Things have gotten incredibly complicated. Trent dragged me into a massive financial mess. The feds are looking into everything, and because of that business loan we took out against the penthouse, they are trying to tie my assets to his investigation. The debt collectors are going to start coming after everything with my name on it." I widened my eyes, acting precisely like the financially illiterate, submissive wife he believed me to be. "Marcus, what does that mean? Are we going to lose the house? Are we bankrupt?" He placed his hands on my shoulders, looking deeply into my eyes. "I am not going to let them touch you, Maya. I promised to protect you, and that is exactly what I am going to do. But we have to act fast. We have to sever our financial ties immediately so they cannot seize your personal income or drag you into federal court." He walked over to the console table and picked up a stack of legal documents, handing them to me. "I had my lawyers draft these this morning," Marcus said softly. "It is a divorce decree." I looked down at the paperwork, fighting the urge to smile. It was exactly what I had anticipated. "A divorce?" I asked, letting my voice tremble. "You want to divorce me?" "It is only on paper, Maya," he lied smoothly, his thumb stroking my cheek. "It is a strategic legal separation. I am taking all the debt, all the liabilities, and stepping in front of the bullet for you. But to make it look legitimate to the federal auditors, you have to sign away your claims to the marital assets. You have to walk away empty-handed on paper. It is the only way the courts will believe you are completely disconnected from my accounts." I scanned the documents. He had structured it brutally. I would waive all rights to alimony, all claims to the Midtown penthouse, all shares in his investment firm, and all access to our joint savings. In his mind, he was executing a brilliant maneuver. He thought he was tricking me into relinquishing my legal right to his money before the feds could freeze his personal accounts. He thought he was securing his remaining wealth to run off with Haley once the dust settled. He was abandoning me with nothing wrapping it up in a neat little bow of false heroism. He wanted me to thank him for destroying my life. "Marcus." I do not understand all this legal jargon, I whispered, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Are you sure this is the only way? Will it really protect us? I swear to you, Maya, he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Just sign the papers. Let me take the fall. I will come find you when this is all over and we will start fresh. Just trust me. I nodded slowly, playing the ultimate fool. I walked over to the table, picked up his expensive silver pen, and without a single moment of hesitation, I signed my name on every highlighted line. I initialed the waivers. I signed the asset forfeiture clauses. I legally severed myself from Marcus entirely. Thank you, Maya. Marcus breathed out a massive wave of relief crashing over his face. He quickly snatched the papers from the table, clutching them to his chest, as if they were made of solid gold. You are doing the right thing. I have to get these filed at the courthouse before 5 o'clock. I love you. He did not even look back as he practically sprinted out the front door, eager to finalize the paperwork that would leave me destitute. He thought he had outsmarted the system. He thought he had won. The heavy oak door clicked shut. The house fell completely silent. I dropped the act instantly. My trembling hands steadied. My tearful expression vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating grin. Marcus had just legally separated my clean, untraceable private wealth from his toxic, federally investigated accounts. He had just insulated me from the massive legal fallout of his own crimes. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and dialed my private wealth manager at Apex Capital. He answered on the first ring. The divorce is signed, I said, walking slowly toward the kitchen to pour myself a fresh cup of coffee. I am legally severed from all his liabilities. Excellent work, Maya, my lawyer replied, his voice crackling with anticipation over the secure line. The feds just officially locked down the last of Marcus's dummy corporations. He is entirely liquid poor. He has absolutely nothing but the debt. I smiled, staring out the kitchen window at the manicured lawn Vivian was so proud of. It is time for the final phase. What are your orders? My lawyer asked. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the taste rich and deeply satisfying. Activate the hostile takeover clause, I commanded. Use my private capital to buy out all the outstanding debt of Trent's corporate law firm. Purchase Marcus's defaulted second mortgage on the penthouse. I want to own every single cent they owe. I want to be their sole creditor by tomorrow morning. Consider it done, he said. Marcus and Trent thought they were playing a high-stakes game of financial chess. They had no idea I had just bought the entire board. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was draped in floor-to-ceiling emerald velvet. The annual Emerald Gala was the crown jewel of Atlanta's high society calendar, a glittering spectacle of charitable giving that served as the ultimate vanity project for the city's wealthiest families. This year, my mother was the chairwoman. Vivian had spent the last 9 months micromanaging every single detail, from the imported white orchids to the gold leaf lettering on the dinner menus. But her true masterpiece was the evening centerpiece event. In front of 1,000 influential guests, our family was scheduled to step onto the main stage to receive the Philanthropic Model Family of the Year award. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost poetic. We were gathered in the private VIP green room just behind the main stage, waiting for the gala host to begin the introductions. The atmosphere inside the lavishly decorated suite was thick and suffocating. The air conditioning was on full blast, yet Trent was sweating profusely through his custom tuxedo. He stood by the wet bar aggressively downing his third glass of bourbon, his eyes bloodshot and darting frantically to his muted phone every few seconds. He still believed Vivian's stolen retirement funds were processing through Marcus's offshore accounts, buying him time. He had absolutely no idea those funds had been instantly intercepted and frozen by the very federal trap I had set. Marcus sat on a velvet armchair, looking exceptionally smug. The panic that had driven him to his knees in my living room just days prior had completely vanished. He believed the divorce decree I signed had successfully severed him from any liability regarding my assets, leaving him free to let his domestic accounts crash while he planned his inevitable escape with his hidden offshore wealth. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, shooting me a patronizing, entirely fake smile of reassurance. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. I sat quietly in the corner holding a glass of sparkling water. I was wearing a breathtaking floor-length emerald green silk gown. I had purchased it myself weeks ago specifically for this event. It draped perfectly an elegant and understated piece that did not need to scream for attention. I watched the people who had terrorized my life with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. They were standing on a financial landmine, entirely oblivious to the fact that my finger was resting heavily on the detonator. Then the heavy mahogany door to the green room swung open, and the final piece of their twisted social game strutted into the room. Haley walked in, invited by Chloe under the guise of being a platinum-tier donor. But it was not her presence that made the oxygen instantly evaporate from the room. It was what she was wearing. Haley was dressed in the exact same emerald green silk gown that I was wearing. It was not a cheap knockoff. It was not a similar style. It was the exact bespoke designer dress right down to the intricate beadwork along the neckline. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the move hit me like a physical wave. Marcus had not just carried on a long-term affair in a penthouse bought with stolen money. He had gone to the designer boutique, purchased the exact same six-figure dress for his mistress that he knew his wife was wearing to a highly publicized gala, and coordinated with Chloe to make sure Haley wore it tonight. It was the ultimate calculated insult. It was a visual declaration of replacement designed to break me completely, just minutes before I had to walk onto a stage and pretend to be his loving wife. A heavy, jagged silence fell over the green room. Trent stopped drinking. Marcus sat up straighter, a vicious, unapologetic gleam in his eyes. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, giving him the perfect excuse to call me hysterical and unstable in front of the entire family. Chloe broke the silence with a loud, theatrical gasp, clapping her hands over her mouth in a display of entirely manufactured shock. "Oh my goodness!" Chloe practically shrieked, her eyes darting between Haley and me with malicious delight. "What an absolute nightmare! Maya, look at this. You two are wearing the exact same gown. I cannot believe it. Haley, where on earth did you get yours?" Haley smiled, stepping further into the room and doing a slow, arrogant twirl. The emerald silk flared around her legs. "Oh, it was a gift," she purred, her eyes locking directly onto Marcus for a fraction of a second before finding me. "A very generous, very special gift. I told him I needed something breathtaking for tonight, and he just has the absolute best taste." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh, stepping closer to Haley and examining the fabric. "Well, it is just stunning on you, Haley. The tailoring is flawless. It hugs your curves perfectly." She turned her head slowly, looking me up and down, with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. "It just goes to show you, Maya. It does not matter how much a dress costs. Some people can put on a designer gown, and they still manage to look entirely cheap. It is all about how you carry it, and Haley simply has a natural class that cannot be bought." Vivian stepped forward, her evening gown glittering under the crystal chandeliers. She had witnessed the entire exchange. She knew exactly what Marcus was doing. She knew Haley was wearing a dress bought by my husband. But instead of defending her own daughter, Vivian sided with the illusion of power. "Chloe is right, Maya," my mother snapped, her voice cold and commanding. "Do not stand there looking like a kicked dog. You are embarrassing yourself. Haley looks beautiful. If you had taken better care of your figure and put a fraction of the effort into your appearance that she does, perhaps you would wear the dress better. Now smooth out your expression and stand up straight. We are about to be called to the stage, and I will not have your pathetic insecurities ruining my night." They waited for the tears. They stood in a semicircle, a firing squad of narcissists, waiting for the final satisfying crack of my spirit. They wanted me to shatter. I looked down at the sparkling water in my glass, watching the tiny bubbles rise to the surface. I felt my pulse. It was slow, steady, completely undisturbed. I did not feel humiliated. I did not feel broken. Looking at Marcus's smug face, Chloe's vicious smile, and Vivian's arrogant sneer, I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of pity. They were arguing over the tailoring of a silk dress while they were financially bleeding to death. I slowly looked up, meeting Haley's triumphant gaze. "You are absolutely right, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly smooth, resonating with a terrifying, absolute calm. The dress does look spectacular on her. In fact, I think it is the perfect outfit for Haley to wear when she has to explain to the federal authorities how she acquired a $3 million penthouse on a boutique retail salary. Green is definitely her color. Haley's smug smile instantly froze her eyes, widening in sudden panicked confusion. Chloe's mocking laugh died in her throat. Marcus shot up from his velvet chair, his face turning a sickly shade of gray, but before any of them could utter a single word, the heavy double doors of the green room swung open again. The stage manager stood in the doorway holding a clipboard and wearing a headset. "Mrs. Vivian," the stage manager announced briskly. "The host is wrapping up the opening remarks. We need the entire family in the wings right now. You are on in exactly 2 minutes." Vivian blinked, visibly shaken by my comment, but her obsession with the spotlight immediately overrode her confusion. She snapped into host mode, waving her hands frantically. "Everyone move. Marcus, Trent, get into position. Maya, not another word from you. Do exactly as you are told." They scrambled toward the door, their minds racing, terrified by what I had just said, but trapped by the immediate demand of the gala. As they rushed out into the hallway leading to the stage wings, my father stepped out from the shadows near the wet bar. Isaiah had been standing there the entire time, a silent, imposing witness to their cruelty. He was wearing a classic black tuxedo, his posture rigid and commanding. He held a thick black leather portfolio tightly in his left hand. I walked over to him. The roar of the 1,000-person crowd out in the ballroom seeped through the walls, a massive wave of applause responding to the host's introduction. I reached up and carefully adjusted the silk bow tie at his collar, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective pride. He placed his large, warm hand firmly on my shoulder. "It is time," daughter Isaiah said quietly, his voice steady as a mountain. "Finish it." I offered him a small, genuine smile. I turned toward the doorway, listening to the host's booming voice echoing through the grand ballroom, calling my family's name to the stage. I stepped out of the green room and walked toward the blinding lights ready to burn their empire to the ground. The walk from the green room to the main stage of the St. Regis Ballroom felt like stepping into an alternate dimension. The heavy velvet curtains parted, and a blinding wash of spotlights hit us. The applause from the 1,000 influential guests was deafening, a tidal wave of manufactured adoration for Atlanta's most perfect family. My mother practically glided into the light. Despite the terrifying confrontation that had just occurred backstage, Vivian's face was a mask of absolute radiant joy. She waved gracefully to the crowd, soaking in the validation she craved more than oxygen. Chloe followed, her chin held high, posing for the photographers lining the center aisle. Trent and Marcus flanked them, pasting on their best, most charming smiles. They were all banking on the hope that I was just making empty threats, assuming the sheer pressure of the public eye would force me into submission. I walked out last, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly behind me. I kept my expression serene, playing my part flawlessly, as I took my place next to Marcus at the center of the expansive stage. The gala host stepped back, gesturing grandly to our family. Marcus, stepping smoothly into his role as the charismatic patriarch in waiting, moved to the crystal podium and adjusted the microphone. The crowd quieted, settling into their seats with their champagne flutes and expectant smiles. "Thank you, everyone." Marcus began, his voice rich, resonant, and dripping with perfectly calibrated humility. "Receiving the Philanthropic Model Family of the Year award is not just an honor, it is a responsibility. We believe that true success is built on a foundation of integrity, loyalty, and unwavering devotion to those we love." He paused, letting the words echo through the massive ballroom. He turned his head and looked directly at me, his eyes crinkling in a display of manufactured adoration that made my stomach turn. "But I could never stand here today without the quiet strength of my beautiful wife." Maya, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a softer, more intimate register. "She is my rock. She is the invisible force that holds our home together, a woman of endless grace and unquestioning support. Beside every successful man is a woman who sacrifices her own desires to build his empire. Maya." This award belongs to you just as much as it belongs to me." A collective appreciative sigh rippled through the audience. A few women in the front row actually dabbed at their eyes. It was a spectacular performance. He was painting me as the ultimate subservient martyr, entirely oblivious to the fact that I held the match that was about to incinerate his life. The audience burst into polite applause. Marcus reached out his hand, gesturing for me to join him at the podium. He expected me to step forward, smile bashfully, and nod in silent gratitude. I stepped up to the podium, but I did not smile, and I did not remain silent. Instead, I reached out and wrapped my hand firmly around the microphone. Marcus resisted for a fraction of a second, his fingers tightening around the metal stand, his eyes flashing with sudden sharp warning. But he was trapped. If he fought me for the microphone in front of 1,000 people, the perfect illusion would shatter. I locked eyes with him, my gaze completely dead, and pulled the microphone from his grip. Marcus swallowed hard, taking a slow step back. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully across the silent ballroom. That was a truly beautiful sentiment. Integrity, loyalty, and unwavering devotion. Those are heavy words. They demand transparency, and our family has always believed in being completely transparent with our beloved community. Backstage, I saw my father Isaiah give a brief, sharp nod to the technician managing the master control board. "Tonight we prepared a special presentation," I continued, my voice echoing over the speakers. "A true look at the foundation of our family legacy. We want to show you exactly how the empire was built." The grand, swelling orchestral music that had been playing softly in the background suddenly cut out with a sharp electronic click. The lights in the ballroom dimmed perfectly. Behind us, the massive 30-foot LED screen that spanned the entire width of the stage flared to life. The audience leaned forward, expecting a heartwarming video montage of charity events, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and smiling children. Instead, the screen illuminated the ballroom with the stark, glaring image of a certified banking document. A murmur of confusion rippled through the front rows. The document was magnified to a massive scale. At the very top, the header read, "Apex Capital Offshore Routing." I had the system highlight specific undeniable lines in bright glowing red marker. The crowd read the names out loud. Dummy corporations, Cayman Island routing numbers, and right in the center a transfer order detailing the theft of $2.5 million from my father's retirement account, authorized by Vivian, moving directly into Marcus's laundering funnel. Marcus lunged forward, his face draining of blood. "Maya, what are you doing?" he hissed through his teeth, reaching for the microphone. "Turn that off right now." I stepped out of his reach, keeping my eyes on the crowd. "But we did not stop at financial ingenuity," I announced calmly into the microphone. "A model family is also built on profound, unbreakable loyalty. Let us take a look at that loyalty." The screen flashed again. The banking documents disappeared, replaced by massive high-definition screenshots of text messages. The phone numbers at the top were clearly identified: Marcus and Haley. The messages were entirely explicit and thoroughly damning. They were 10 feet tall, impossible to miss, and completely legible from the very back of the room. The first message from Marcus read, "She actually signed the divorce papers. The stupid girl took the bait. The debt stays with her, the offshore money stays with us. See you at the penthouse tonight." Haley's response appeared below it, complete with kissing emojis. "Finally, Trent is losing his mind about the frozen trust, but as long as our Midtown property is safe, I do not care. I am wearing the green dress tonight. Make sure she sees it." The silence in the St. Regis ballroom was absolute, suffocating, and heavy with shock. 1,000 of the wealthiest, most influential people in the state sat completely paralyzed, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. Then the reality of what they were reading set in. The silence shattered into a collective, deafening gasp. It was the sound of a dynasty collapsing in real time. The reaction on stage was instantaneous and catastrophic. Chloe let out a piercing, guttural shriek, staring at the text messages, confirming that her own husband Trent was under investigation and that her brother-in-law was sleeping with her best friend. She spun around, looking at Haley in the wings, who was currently backing away in sheer terror. Vivian stepped forward, her eyes wide, darting frantically across the giant text messages and the financial documents, that proved she had stolen her husband's life savings for absolutely nothing. The social elite of Atlanta were pointing at her, whispering, their faces twisted in disgust. The validation she craved had transformed into absolute public humiliation. She gasped for air, clutching her chest. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed in a heap of glittering fabric, fainting dead away onto the polished stage floor. Trent completely lost his mind. His face turned a dangerous mottled purple. He broke formation, sprinting to the edge of the stage toward the audio-visual booth. "Cut the screens!" Trent screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Cut the power right now! Turn it off! Turn it off!" He slammed his fists against the technician's glass partition, but the technician just stared back at him, holding up his hands in surrender. "I cannot," the technician yelled back over the mounting roar of the crowd. "The system is locked out. Someone instituted an external override. I have no control." The screens kept scrolling automatically. More bank transfers, more explicit messages, more proof of their crimes flashing brightly for the entire city to see. Photographers in the press pit were rapidly snapping pictures, their camera flashes strobing across the stage, capturing Marcus's terror and Trent's absolute meltdown. Marcus turned to me, his chest heaving, his perfect facade entirely stripped away to reveal the cowardly, terrified man beneath. He looked like he wanted to strike me, to grab me, to do anything to stop the bleeding, but he was completely paralyzed by the glaring lights and the 1,000 witnesses. I lowered the microphone. I did not run. I did not hide. I stood perfectly still in my emerald green dress, looking at the wreckage of the people who had tried to break me. The trap had slammed shut, and the execution was flawless. The acoustics of the St. Regis ballroom amplified my voice, sending it ringing sharply through the velvet-draped walls. The flashbulbs from the press pit temporarily blinded the front row, but my focus was entirely locked on the man standing frozen near the audio-visual booth. "Trent!" I said, the sound of his name cracking through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. His head snapped up. His face was slick with a cold, terrified sweat, his custom tuxedo suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for his trembling frame. "You have spent the last 5 years calling me a freelance consultant?" I continued, my tone conversational, yet carrying the absolute authority of an executioner. "You told everyone in this room that I was a glorified secretary, a financial illiterate who was desperately lucky to marry into your elite, untouchable circle." I took a slow step forward, the emerald silk of my gown catching the stage lights. I let a razor-sharp smile touch my lips. "Allow me to formally introduce myself to you and to Atlanta's high society. I am the sole founder and CEO of Apex Capital." A shockwave of collective gasps rippled through the 1,000 influential guests. Apex Capital was a ghost whale in the Southern Financial District, a notoriously aggressive private equity firm known for ruthless, calculated acquisitions. The city's elite knew the name, but the identity of its chief executive had always been fiercely guarded. Looking at their stunned faces, I watched the realization wash over them. The quiet, submissive wife they had ignored at country club luncheons had secretly been holding the keys to the city the entire time. "Thanks to the power of attorney and the asset waivers you and Marcus so eagerly forced me to sign today, my private capital was entirely shielded from your federal investigations," I announced, my voice echoing over the speakers. "You thought you were tricking me into walking away empty-handed. Instead, you gave me the legal clearance to execute a hostile takeover without triggering a single conflict of interest. I used my untethered capital to buy out all of your outstanding debt. I purchased the defaulted loans on your corporate law firm. Trent, you are officially bankrupt. I own your firm, and by extension, I own you." Trent physically stumbled backward, his shoulders slamming into the glass partition of the control booth. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His entire identity, his wealth, his prestige, and his power had just been legally vaporized in front of the city's most powerful people. "But I did not stop there," I said, pressing the remote control hidden in my palm. The massive LED screen behind me shifted instantly. The offshore routing numbers dissolved, replaced by a high-definition image of a verified property deed. You see, Trent, you have been panicking for 48 hours, wondering why your firm's escrow accounts were suddenly empty. You thought the federal auditors froze the money you stole from your clients. They did not. Your money was already gone before the feds even arrived. I turned and pointed at Marcus, who was visibly shaking his eyes, darting frantically toward the stage exits. Marcus did not just hide your embezzled funds in his dummy corporations, I explained to Trent, my voice slicing through the deadly quiet of the ballroom. He spent them. He took the millions you stole, the exact money that is going to send you to federal prison for the next 20 years, and he used it to buy a $3 million penthouse in Midtown. I clicked the remote again. The property deed zoomed in, highlighting the registered owner's name in glowing crimson text. And he put the deed entirely in the name of his mistress, I said, pausing to let the weight of the revelation settle over the crowd. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Haley, who was now weeping silently in the wings, clutching the emerald green dress that Marcus had bought her. Your biological sister, Trent. The silence in the ballroom reached a terrifying, absolute vacuum. The sheer depravity of the betrayal hung in the air, thick and venomous. Marcus embezzled your stolen money, ruined your career, and condemned you to a federal indictment, all to finance a luxury penthouse for his affair with your own little sister, I stated, delivering the final fatal blow. The psychological snap of Trent's mind breaking was almost audible. He stood frozen by the glass partition, for 3 agonizing seconds, his eyes darting between the property deed on the massive screen, his weeping sister in the wings, and the terrified, sweating face of his brother-in-law. The realization that Marcus had played him, stolen from him, and slept with his sister while leaving him to take the fall for federal wire fraud shattered whatever remained of his sanity. Trent let out an ungodly primal roar. He lunged away from the control booth, charging across the polished stage like a rabid animal. Marcus barely had time to raise his hands, stammering a pathetic, incoherent plea for mercy. It did not matter. Trent hit him with the force of a freight train. The impact sounded like a sickening crack of bone against bone. Marcus's head snapped back and he went down hard, crashing into the crystal podium and sending it shattering across the stage floor. The microphone squealed with a harsh burst of feedback. Trent did not stop. He threw himself on top of Marcus, his fists coming down in a blind, psychotic rage, raining brutal blows onto Marcus's face and chest. The elite crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. Women screamed, clutching their pearls and spilling expensive champagne across the velvet carpets. Men in tailored tuxedos shouted for security. The press photographers leaned over the stage monitors, their camera flashes strobing frantically to capture the violent, humiliating collapse of Atlanta's model family. Blood spattered across the pristine stage, staining the cuffs of Trent's white shirt, as Marcus desperately tried to shield his face from the onslaught. Uniformed security guards burst from the side doors, rushing the stage and struggling to pull a screaming, thrashing Trent off of Marcus's battered body. Amidst the screaming and the chaos, Chloe finally snapped out of her paralyzed horror. She watched her husband being restrained by 3 security guards, his face twisted in homicidal fury. She looked at her brother groaning on the floor through a bloody mouth. Then she turned her sheer, unadulterated fury onto me. She sprinted across the stage, her high heels snapping against the floorboards, stopping just a few feet away from where I stood, perfectly still. Her face was contorted with a hideous, desperate rage. "You bitch!" Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "You destroyed this family. You ruined us." I looked at her, completely unbothered by her screaming, the violent brawl, or the deafening roar of the crowd. I reached calmly into the bodice of my gown and withdrew a neatly folded document. I pulled out the second piece of paper. I unfolded the crisp white document with agonizing slowness. The heavy, frantic breathing of the security guards restraining Trent and the pathetic wet groans of Marcus bleeding on the polished floor were the only sounds directly around us, while the massive ballroom crowd watched in stunned, breathless anticipation. "I ruined this family!" I repeated, my voice projecting through the microphone with a lethal, icy precision. No, Chloe. I did not ruin anything. I simply turned on the lights so everyone could see the rot. I held the paper up. It was not a bank statement or a property deed. It bore the heavy embossed seal of the state government. You have spent your entire life tearing me down to make yourself feel taller, I said, looking directly into Chloe's panicked, mascara-streaked eyes. You mocked my clothes. You mocked my career. You called me a pathetic, financially illiterate burden. But while you were busy admiring your reflection, you made a catastrophic miscalculation. You assumed I was stupid. Chloe opened her mouth to snap back, but her voice failed her. The sheer, radiating confidence I projected was something she had never seen before, and it terrified her. You loved playing the high-powered luxury real estate broker. I continued pacing slowly across the stage. You loved bragging about your record-breaking commissions and your exclusive client list. But luxury real estate is a very small world. Chloe, and paper trails are virtually impossible to erase when you know exactly where to look. I clicked the presentation remote in my hand. The massive LED screen behind me shifted instantly. The explicit text messages between Marcus and Haley vanished, replaced by a series of highly classified, heavily stamped real estate transaction records. At the bottom of every single fraudulent transfer, highlighted in bright yellow, was Chloe's flamboyant, unmistakable signature as the primary broker. The crowd erupted in a fresh wave of shocked whispers. Did you really think you could act as the sole broker for Marcus's shell companies without leaving a trail of breadcrumbs? I asked, my voice echoing off the velvet walls of the ballroom. You facilitated the purchase of the Midtown penthouse for your husband's sister using stolen money. You brokered half a dozen other commercial properties designed specifically to wash Trent's embezzled escrow funds. You did not just turn a blind eye, Chloe. You were the architect of their money laundering scheme. You took a massive illegal percentage off the top of every single dirty transaction. That is a lie! Chloe screamed, her voice cracking in pure, high-pitched desperation. She took a step toward me, her hands curled into fists. You fabricated those documents. You are making this up because you are a jealous, bitter, pathetic woman. I did not even flinch. I just looked at her with a profound, terrifying emptiness. This document in my hand, I stated calmly, is a certified stamped copy of a formal complaint that was filed and accepted this morning. It is currently sitting on the desk of the chief investigator for the State Real Estate Commission. Attached to it is a full, unredacted 70-page dossier submitted directly to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. I personally provided them with every routing number, every fake property deed, and every illegal wire transfer you ever authorized. Chloe froze. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a beautifully dressed corpse. Her mouth hung open in silent horror as the absolute reality of her situation crashed down upon her. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, the commission will permanently revoke your real estate license, I announced, delivering the verdict to the entire silent ballroom. Your career is completely over, but that is the least of your problems. By tomorrow night, when the federal agents finish cross-referencing these deeds with Trent's frozen accounts, you will be formally indicted for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. You are looking at a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. The glittering, pristine illusion of Chloe's life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The haughty, arrogant woman who had mocked my dress just 15 minutes ago completely disintegrated. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the stage, her expensive designer gown pooling around her in a pathetic, messy heap. No, no, no! Chloe gasped, pulling at her perfectly styled hair, her chest heaving in full-blown panic. This cannot be happening. This is a mistake. I did not know where the money came from. I swear I did not know. She scrambled on her hands and knees across the floorboards, desperately crawling toward where her husband was being pinned down by 3 burly security guards. 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers were already rushing down the center aisle of the ballroom, their radios squawking, responding to the violent assault on stage. Trent, Chloe sobbed, grabbing at the sleeve of his blood-stained tuxedo. Trent, tell them. Tell them I did not know. Call your partners. Call the fixers. Do something. You have to save me. They cannot send me to prison. Trent wrenched his arm away from her grasp with a violent, disgusted jerk. His face was bruised and swollen, his lips split from where Marcus had managed a desperate counterpunch. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the absolute madness in his eyes. He looked at his wife not with love or protection, but with sheer unadulterated revulsion. "Get off me!" Trent spat, his voice a hoarse, ragged growl. "You stupid, greedy parasite! Your brother slept with my sister in a house you helped him buy with my money. You are all dead to me." He turned his head away, ignoring her hysterical sobbing, as the police officers bounded onto the stage, pulling his arms roughly behind his back and securing them in heavy steel handcuffs. Chloe wailed a terrible guttural sound of pure defeat, clutching her stomach as she watched her husband being read his rights and dragged away. Marcus was still on the floor nearby, groaning in pain, surrounded by paramedics who had just arrived with a stretcher. Neither of the men who had built her luxurious, untouchable world could do a single thing to save her. She was entirely on her own, and she had absolutely nothing left. I stood silently at the podium, watching the destruction of my abusers with a cold, unwavering detachment. The sweet, intoxicating taste of absolute justice coated my tongue. But the final act of this catastrophic evening was not quite over. Behind me, near the back of the stage, a sudden erratic movement caught the corner of my eye. Vivian, who had fainted dead away from the shock of the initial financial revelations, was groggily coming back to consciousness. She pushed herself up off the floorboards, her elaborate hairstyle ruined her expensive jewelry, sitting crooked against her neck. She blinked rapidly, her vision clearing just in time to witness the absolute devastation of her golden children. She saw Trent, the prestigious son-in-law, being hauled off the stage in handcuffs by armed police officers. She saw Marcus, the brilliant, wealthy provider, strapped to a paramedic's backboard with a broken, bloody face. She saw Chloe, her perfect, beautiful daughter, sobbing hysterically on her hands and knees, her reputation and future completely destroyed. And then she saw me. I was standing tall, immaculate, and completely untouched by the carnage, looking down at them all from the podium. The shock and embarrassment that had caused Vivian to faint rapidly boiled over into a blinding, narcissistic rage. I had not just ruined her children, I had humiliated her in front of the entire high society of Atlanta. I had destroyed her gala, her social standing, and her desperate need to be worshipped by her peers. To a narcissist, public humiliation is a fate worse than death, and I had just publicly executed her entire identity. "You," Vivian shrieked, a sound so raw and venomous it barely sounded human. She scrambled to her feet, kicking off her high heels so she could move faster. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure murderous hatred. She ignored the police, she ignored the paramedics, and she charged directly across the stage toward me. Her eyes were locked onto my face, her hand raising high into the air, fingers curled tightly together. She was going to deliver a slap identical to the one she had given me in my kitchen, a desperate, violent attempt to force me back into submission, to punish me for daring to destroy her perfect world. The crowd gasped. The security guards, distracted by Trent and Marcus, were too far away to intervene. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, my posture perfect, waiting for her to strike. But the blow never landed. Just inches from my face, a massive, thick hand shot out of nowhere, clamping down onto Vivian's wrist with the stopping power of a steel vise. The impact halted her charge instantly, nearly lifting her off her feet. Vivian gasped in shock, her eyes darting frantically to see who had dared to stop her. It was Isaiah. My father stood between me and the woman he had loved for nearly 40 years. His jaw was set in granite, his broad chest shielding me completely from her wrath. The quiet, submissive, perpetually accommodating husband was entirely gone. In his place stood a man who had finally woken up to the monstrous reality of his wife. "Let go of me, Isaiah!" Vivian screamed, thrashing wildly against his iron grip. "She ruined everything. Look at what she did to our family. Let me go so I can teach this ungrateful bitch a lesson." Isaiah did not move a single inch. His grip on her wrist tightened, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying authority she had never seen from him. "Do not ever," Isaiah said, his voice low, vibrating with a suppressed fury that silenced her instantly. "Raise your hand to my daughter again." The sheer shock of the physical resistance radiated up Vivian's arm, freezing her features into a grotesque mask of confusion. For 30 years, she had conditioned my father to be a silent shadow, an accommodating wallet, who surrendered to her every whim and tolerated her endless cruelties for the sake of marital peace. She expected him to step aside. She expected him to lower his eyes. He did neither. Isaiah threw her hand back with such forceful disgust that Vivian staggered, her expensive stilettos scraping loudly against the polished stage floor. She clutched her wrist, gasping for air, as if she had just been plunged into freezing water. "Isaiah," she stammered, her voice stripped of its usual venom, replaced by a shrill, vibrating panic. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind? Look at what she is doing to us." Isaiah did not look at me. His eyes were entirely locked on the woman he had spent a lifetime trying to satisfy. He stepped forward, his broad silhouette towering over her, radiating a suffocating, absolute authority that commanded the attention of every single person in the grand ballroom. The chaotic murmurs of the elite crowd died down instantly. Even the security guards pinning Trent to the floor paused, captivated by the sheer gravity of the moment. "I have spent 3 decades watching you trade your soul for a seat at tables filled with people who do not care if you live or die." Isaiah's voice boomed. He did not need a microphone. His voice carried the deep, resonant acoustic of a man who had finally found his spine. "I watched you belittle our daughter. I watched you poison this family with your relentless, bottomless vanity. I tolerated it because I believed that underneath all the glittering fabric and the country club memberships, you were still the woman I married." He raised the heavy black leather portfolio in his left hand. "I was wrong," Isaiah declared. "You are completely hollow." Vivian's eyes darted frantically toward the audience. She could feel the collective gaze of 1,000 Atlanta socialites burning into her skin. The women she played tennis with, the board members she desperately courted, the politicians she bribed with charity donations, they were all watching her unravel. "Please keep your voice down," Vivian pleaded, stepping closer to him, her hands raised in a desperate, placating gesture. "People are staring. We can handle this at home. We are the model family of the year. We have an image to protect." Isaiah let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely no humor. "Your image is a rotting corpse, Vivian, and I refuse to be buried with it." With a swift, decisive motion, Isaiah unzipped the portfolio. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. Without a single ounce of hesitation, he hurled them directly into her face. The heavy parchment struck Vivian's chest and exploded into a flurry of white pages, raining down around her designer heels like a storm of confetti. The crowd gasped in unison. "You stole my retirement money to save these scumbags!" Isaiah roared, pointing a trembling, furious finger at Trent and Marcus, who were bleeding and restrained on the floor. "You bypassed our banking security, liquidated the life savings I spent 35 years breaking my back to build, and you handed it over to a pair of federal criminals just to keep your name on a gala invitation." Vivian scrambled backward, her eyes wide with terror as she looked down at the scattered papers. In bold, aggressive black ink, the headers screamed their reality to anyone close enough to read them. Divorce decrees, asset forfeiture notices, certified banking ledgers highlighting her fraudulent unauthorized wire transfers. Isaiah stepped directly into her personal space, forcing her to look him in the eye. "You valued this facade more than your own biological daughter. The game is over, Vivian. I am divorcing you. I am pursuing full criminal charges for the theft of my retirement accounts, and I am leaving you with absolutely nothing." The silence that followed was apocalyptic. Vivian stood completely paralyzed in the center of the stage. Her brain simply could not process the magnitude of the destruction. She turned her head slowly, looking out into the sea of faces in the ballroom. She was looking for an ally. She was looking for the sycophants who usually praised her charity work and complimented her taste. She found nothing but profound, undisguised revulsion. The wealthy elite of Atlanta were already stepping back. Women she considered her closest confidants were shielding their faces, turning their backs and whispering furiously to their husbands. They were looking at her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. In the brutal, unforgiving world of high society, losing your money was a tragedy, but stealing it to cover up federal fraud was a permanent, irreversible excommunication. She was no longer the chairwoman of the Emerald Gala. She was a toxic liability. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Her breathing became rapid, shallow, and ragged. She spun around, looking desperately for the pillars of her manufactured success. She looked at Trent, the prestigious lawyer who was supposed to elevate their social standing. He was handcuffed, his face pressed against the stage floor by a police officer screaming profanities at Chloe. She looked at Marcus, the brilliant investor who was supposed to fund her lavish lifestyle. He was strapped to a paramedic's gurney, his face a bloody, swollen mess, completely ruined. She looked at Chloe, her perfect golden reflection, who was sitting in a heap of torn silk, rocking back and forth in a state of catatonic shock. Her empire was dead. Her safety nets were gone. Then Vivian's eyes locked onto me. I was the only person left standing. I was the CEO of Apex Capital. I held the debt. I held the power. I held the money. A violent shudder ripped through Vivian's body. The woman who had spent 3 decades demanding obedience, who had called me a pathetic disappointment, who had literally slapped me across the face to defend a thief, completely broke. The arrogance melted off her bones. Her knees buckled under the crushing weight of her immediate reality. She dropped to the floorboards. Vivian crawled through the scattered divorce papers, her expensive dress dragging through the smears of Marcus's blood. She reached me, throwing her arms around my legs, burying her face into the fabric of my emerald gown. She was sobbing hysterically, a loud, ugly, humiliating sound that echoed painfully through the microphones still live on the stage. "Maya, please," Vivian wailed, her voice muffled against my legs. "Please, my beautiful girl. You have the money. You bought the debt. You can fix this. You can stop the investigations. We are family. I am your mother. I brought you into this world. Everything I did for us. I did it to protect our name. You cannot let them do this to me. You cannot let me lose everything," she was begging. The grand matriarch of Atlanta society was groveling at the feet of the daughter she had deemed socially unfit. I looked down at her. I did not feel the triumphant rush of vindication I had expected. I did not feel anger. I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. I looked at the top of her highlighted hair, watching her shoulders heave with desperate, self-serving tears. She was not crying because she had betrayed me. She was crying because she was experiencing the consequences of her actions for the first time in her life. I reached down my hands, moving slowly and deliberately. I did not touch her shoulders to comfort her. I grabbed the fabric of my silk gown where her manicured fingers were digging in like desperate claws. "You did not do this for us, Vivian," I said, my voice quiet, cold, and entirely devoid of mercy. "You did it for yourself. You traded your daughter for a front-row seat to a theater of lies, and now the curtain has closed." I forcefully yanked the fabric out of her grip. Vivian fell forward, her hands slapping against the hard floor. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers, her mouth open in a silent scream of absolute despair. "You are not my mother," I stated, looking down at the broken shell of a woman on the floor. "You are just a casualty of your own greed." I stepped back entirely, removing myself from her reach. As I turned my back on her and looked out toward the grand entrance of the St. Regis ballroom, the heavy, oppressive silence of the room was suddenly shattered. From the streets outside, the sharp, piercing wail of police sirens began to echo through the night. The sound multiplied, growing louder, closer, and more frantic as a fleet of federal vehicles converged on the hotel. The flashing red and blue lights pierced through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the terrified faces of the audience and the shattered remnants of my family in the cold, unforgiving colors of absolute justice. The heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance of the ballroom did not just open, they were violently shoved apart. A sea of dark windbreakers bearing the bold yellow letters of the FBI flooded into the pristine, glittering space, accompanied by a dozen heavily armed state police officers. The sheer terrifying presence of federal law enforcement completely shattered whatever fragile decorum remained in the St. Regis. The orchestra, which had stopped playing minutes ago, scrambled to abandon their instruments. The city's wealthiest power brokers, politicians, and socialites instinctively backed away, pressing themselves against the velvet-draped walls to clear a wide, undisputed path. The lead federal agent, a tall, unsmiling man with a thick silver mustache, strode directly down the center aisle. He did not spare a single glance for the terrified billionaires or the scattered crystal on the carpet. His eyes were locked dead ahead on the stage. "Secure the perimeter," the lead agent barked into the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Nobody leaves the ballroom until IDs are verified." The local police officers, who were currently pinning Trent to the floorboards, looked up as the federal agent swarmed the stage. "We will take it from here," the lead agent announced, flashing a federal warrant. Trent was hauled to his feet. His custom tuxedo jacket was ripped at the shoulder, his expensive silk tie stained with Marcus's blood. The manic homicidal rage that had possessed him just moments ago had completely evaporated, replaced by the hollow, glassy stare of a man who knew his life was definitively over. "Trenton Vance," the agent stated, his voice a flat, mechanical drone that offered absolutely no sympathy. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement of client funds, and federal racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Across the stage, Haley let out a piercing, shattered wail. She had been cowering in the wings, watching the man she was sleeping with get beaten half to death by the brother she had betrayed. But seeing the cold, heavy steel of federal handcuffs snapping tightly around Trent's wrists broke her completely. She lunged forward, her emerald green dress catching on the shattered remains of the crystal podium. "Trent!" Haley screamed, reaching out for him with trembling, desperate hands. "Trent, I am sorry. Please, tell them I had nothing to do with the firm. Tell them I just took the apartment. You have to tell them." Trent did not even look at her. He turned his bruised, bleeding face away, letting the federal agents march him roughly down the stairs and toward the exit. He walked right past the high society peers who had kissed his ring earlier that evening. Now they would not even make eye contact with him. Haley collapsed onto her knees, sobbing so violently she could barely breathe. She looked toward the paramedics who were currently trying to stabilize Marcus on a transport gurney. She tried to crawl toward him, reaching out for the wealthy lover who had promised her the world just hours before. "Marcus!" Haley cried out, her voice raw and pathetic. "Marcus, do something! Call your lawyers!" But Marcus had no lawyers left to call. The federal agent stepped directly into the path of the paramedics, holding up a second warrant. "Marcus Sterling," another agent announced, looking down at the bloody, swollen face of the man strapped to the gurney. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and the illegal transfer of stolen corporate assets." The agent did not care that Marcus was bleeding. He reached down, grabbed Marcus's wrist, and secured a handcuff directly to the metal railing of the medical stretcher. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly over the live microphones that were still scattered across the stage. Marcus thrashed wildly against the straps, ignoring the pain radiating from his broken nose and fractured jaw. His perfect, untouchable arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by the panicked, cornered desperation of a trapped animal. He looked past the federal agents, his wild, bloodshot eyes locking onto me, where I stood calmly at the edge of the stage. "Maya!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking, spitting a mixture of blood and saliva onto his white shirt. "Maya, tell them to stop. You cannot do this. You cannot turn over those files." I looked down at him, my expression completely flat. "I do not have to tell them anything, Marcus. The Federal Financial Crimes Division already has the unredacted ledgers. They have the offshore routing numbers. They have the property deeds. I handed them the keys to your entire operation 3 days ago." His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. He thrashed against the handcuffs again, the metal biting deeply into his skin. "You cannot testify against me," Marcus roared desperately, grasping at the very last legal lifeline he thought he had. "It is inadmissible. We are married. Spousal privilege protects those documents. I am your husband. You cannot do this to me. We are husband and wife. I slowly descended the 3 steps from the podium, my emerald gown gliding seamlessly across the floor. I walked right up to the gurney. The federal agents did not stop me. They simply stepped back, allowing me to deliver the final killing blow. I leaned down so that my face was only inches from his. I could smell the copper scent of his blood and the sour stench of his fear. "We are not husband and wife, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that carried a terrifying weight. "We have been legally divorced since the exact moment you handed me that asset waiver to sign. Do you remember?" The memory visibly crashed into his fractured mind. 2 weeks ago, he had slid a thick stack of legal documents across our kitchen counter. He had told me it was a routine liability waiver to protect our personal assets from a minor corporate audit. He had smiled that charming, predatory smile, treating me like a naive, obedient child who would sign anything without reading the fine print. He had not bothered to read the fine print either. "The documents you rushed to sign were not liability waivers," I explained, watching the life completely drain out of his eyes. "They were expedited divorce decrees permanently separating my private capital from your fraudulent holdings and legally severing our marriage. You signed away every single right to my money, and you signed away your spousal privilege. You are nothing to me now, just a criminal on his way to federal prison." Marcus let out a ragged, suffocated gasp. His chest heaved as he tried to find oxygen, but his lungs simply refused to work. He had handed me the very weapon I used to destroy him, and he had done it with a smile on his face. He squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away as the federal agents signaled the paramedics to move. "Get him out of here," the lead agent ordered. The wheels of the gurney rattled loudly against the floorboards as they rolled Marcus away. Haley tried to run after them, but a police officer caught her by the arm, pulling her back and demanding her identification for questioning regarding the Midtown penthouse. Her hysterical crying faded into the background as the massive ballroom doors finally swung shut behind the federal convoy. The immediate threat of law enforcement was gone, but the absolute destruction they left behind was permanent. I turned away from the exit and looked back at the stage. Vivian and Chloe were still there. Vivian was kneeling on the floor, her expensive gown ruined, her hands resting limply in her lap. Isaiah had stepped far away from her, turning his back on his wife of 30 years to speak quietly with a state investigator. He did not look at her once. He had severed the emotional cord completely. Chloe was sitting a few feet away, her mascara completely washed out by her tears, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She looked out into the crowd, her eyes pleading for a single shred of sympathy, a single friendly face to tell her that this was all just a terrible nightmare, and that her elite status was still intact. But high society is a ruthless, unforgiving ecosystem. Wealth and power are the only currencies that matter, and weakness is treated like a fatal contagion. As Chloe reached out her hand toward the front row, the wealthy guests physically recoiled. The women who had clinked champagne glasses with her an hour ago turned their backs, their faces twisted in profound disgust. The men who had done business with Trent pulled their wives away, actively putting distance between themselves and the wreckage on the stage. The murmurs sweeping through the ballroom were no longer shocked. They were venomous. They were talking about the fraud, the embezzlement, the sheer trashy spectacle of a family tearing itself apart over an affair and stolen money. The crowd began to disperse. They did not leave in a panic. They left with a cold, deliberate haste, desperate to scrub the stain of the Sterling family from their reputations. They walked out of the ballroom, stepping over the scattered divorce papers and the shattered glass, completely ignoring Vivian and Chloe, as if they did not even exist. Within minutes, the grand, opulent ballroom of the St. Regis was nearly empty. The sparkling chandeliers cast a cold, unforgiving light on the deserted tables and the abandoned stage. Vivian and Chloe were left entirely alone in the center of the room. They had spent their entire lives treating people like stepping stones, stepping on anyone they deemed inferior to climb higher into the stratosphere of the elite. Now the stepping stones had crumbled. The elite had banished them. They had no money, no power, no husbands, and no status. They were completely, utterly isolated, shunned like a plague that nobody wanted to catch. The absolute silence of the empty ballroom was far more deafening than any scream. 3 weeks. That was the exact amount of time it took for a dynasty built on vanity, cruelty, and stolen money to completely disintegrate into ash. The federal justice system does not operate with the polite, hushed discretion of a country club. It moves with a brutal, mechanical efficiency, and it showed absolutely no mercy to the people who had spent their entire lives believing they were untouchable. Marcus and Trent never saw the outside of a jail cell after the night of the gala. Because of the sheer volume of offshore accounts and the undeniable flight risk they posed with their foreign banking connections, the federal judge categorically denied them bail. The two men who used to wear bespoke Italian suits and drink $1,000 scotch were now sitting in a federal detention center wearing identical scratchy orange jumpsuits. All of their assets, their bank accounts, their investment portfolios, and their luxury properties were instantly frozen by the government. They could not even afford to retain private defense attorneys. The great arrogant Marcus and the prestigious corporate lawyer Trent were forced to rely on overworked public defenders. The walls of their smug brotherhood crumbled immediately. Within 48 hours of their arrest, they were desperately trying to turn state's evidence against one another, fighting like cornered rats to secure a plea deal. Trent blamed Marcus for the offshore accounts, while Marcus blamed Trent for the initial embezzlement. But the federal prosecutors did not need to offer either of them a deal. The unredacted dossier I had provided them was completely bulletproof. Marcus was facing 30 years for wire fraud and money laundering. Trent was looking at 20 years for embezzlement and racketeering. Their lives were effectively overlocked away behind cold steel bars for decades. Haley did not stick around to watch the ship sink. The moment federal agents knocked on the door of the Midtown penthouse to seize the property as illicit assets, she panicked. The illusion of being a pampered, wealthy mistress shattered the second she was threatened with a federal indictment for receiving stolen funds. She packed a single duffel bag with whatever clothes she could carry, abandoned the luxury furniture Marcus had bought her, and fled the city in the middle of the night. Rumor had it she took a Greyhound bus down to Florida, terrified, and completely broke, forced to couch surf with distant relatives she had previously ignored. She became a ghost, scrubbing her social media and hiding from the very world she had so desperately tried to manipulate. Chloe's descent was the most spectacular to witness. The State Real Estate Commission did not just revoke her broker's license, they made a highly publicized example out of her. Her face was plastered across the local news networks and financial blogs, not as the glamorous society wife she had pretended to be, but as the corrupt, greedy facilitator of a massive federal laundering scheme. With her license gone, her husband in federal custody, and all of their joint accounts seized by the government, Chloe was abruptly evicted from her sprawling multi-million-dollar estate. The repossession agents showed up at dawn, towing away her white Range Rover and changing the locks on the mansion doors while she watched from the driveway. She was forced to pack her designer clothes into black garbage bags. With absolutely no income and her credit completely destroyed, she had to move into a cramped, dingy one-bedroom rental apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The woman who used to complain about the thread count of Egyptian cotton sheets was now sleeping on a cheap, sagging mattress in a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and damp mold. She had no car, forcing her to take the public bus to the local discount grocery store. Her phone, which used to ring constantly with invitations to charity galas and exclusive luncheons, was completely silent. The high society friends she had spent years cultivating blocked her number immediately. When she tried to show up at her old country club to beg a former client for a personal loan, the security guards publicly turned her away at the front gate, threatening to call the police for trespassing. She spent her days sitting at a wobbly, peeling laminate kitchen table staring blankly at the massive stack of federal subpoenas and civil lawsuits arriving daily by certified mail. She was drowning in legal fees she could never pay, entirely isolated and stripped of the only thing she ever actually cared about, her status. And then there was Vivian, The grand untouchable matriarch of Atlanta society, had lost everything in the span of a single evening. Isaiah had stayed true to his word. He filed for an expedited divorce the very next morning. Because Vivian had committed federal wire fraud by illegally accessing his retirement accounts to bail out Marcus and Trent. The judge granted Isaiah an emergency injunction, freezing her access to any remaining marital assets. Isaiah took what clean capital he had left, packed his bags, and quietly moved out of state, completely severing all communication with the woman who had poisoned his life for 3 decades. He did not leave a forwarding address. He simply erased her. Without Isaiah's income and with her own accounts locked under federal investigation, Vivian could not pay the massive mortgage on the Sterling estate. The bank foreclosed on the property with brutal speed. The sprawling mansion she had treated like a royal palace was boarded up a bright neon auction sign hammered unceremoniously into the pristine front lawn. Vivian was forced into a cheap extended-stay motel on the edge of the highway. The woman who demanded absolute perfection, who had slapped her own daughter for wearing the wrong dress, was now living out of a suitcase in a room with stained carpets and flickering fluorescent lights. She tried desperately to leverage her old social connections, showing up uninvited to the upscale boutiques and cafes where she used to hold court. But the elite circle she worshipped treated her like a contagious disease. When they saw her coming, they crossed the street. They looked right through her. To them, she was no longer a person. She was a cautionary tale of trashy public ruin. The air was crisp and cool as I drove through the wealthy, tree-lined streets of Buckhead. The engine of my brand-new slate-gray Porsche 911 purred with a deep, powerful resonance. The premium leather steering wheel felt smooth and solid under my hands. I had just left a highly successful board meeting at Apex Capital, and the world stretching out beyond my windshield belonged entirely to me. I had total financial freedom, absolute corporate authority, and a profound, unshakable peace. I took a detour cruising slowly past the sprawling estates and manicured lawns of the old neighborhood. That was when I saw her. Vivian was walking along the sidewalk a mile away from the nearest bus stop. The grand matriarch was completely unrecognizable. The expensive weekly salon visits were gone, leaving her hair flat and showing harsh gray roots. She was wearing a faded, outdated coat that hung loosely over her shrinking frame. In her hands, she carried 3 cheap plastic grocery bags, the thin handles visibly digging painfully into her wrists as she trudged along the concrete. As I watched her walk, a sleek black Mercedes drifted down the street in the opposite direction. I recognized the driver immediately. It was the chairwoman of the country club's hospitality committee, a woman Vivian used to host for high tea every single month. Vivian saw the Mercedes. Her face lit up with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. She stopped walking, shifting the heavy plastic bags to one hand, and raised her arm to wave a frantic, pleading greeting. The woman in the Mercedes turned her head, looked directly at Vivian standing on the sidewalk with her groceries, and deliberately pushed a button on her door panel. The tinted window rolled up seamlessly, sealing Vivian out. The Mercedes accelerated, driving right past her without slowing down for a fraction of a second. Vivian's arm dropped slowly to her side. The absolute crushing weight of her irrelevance settled heavily over her shoulders. She looked broken, ancient, and utterly defeated. She turned her head back toward the road, and that was when her eyes locked onto my car. She recognized me behind the wheel of the Porsche. I saw her mouth open, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and desperate, miserable pleading. She took a tentative step toward the curb, her posture screaming for pity, silently begging me to pull over, to roll down the window, to rescue her from the miserable hell she had built for herself. She expected the dutiful daughter to finally show mercy. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel. I looked right through her, my face a mask of absolute chilling indifference. I did not touch the brake. I did not slow down. I pressed my foot down hard on the gas pedal. The engine roared, a beautiful, aggressive sound of pure power as I blasted past her, leaving her standing alone in the dust of the rearview mirror, and I drove straight ahead into my new life. The roar of the Porsche's engine faded into the distance, gradually dissolving into the rhythmic, soothing sound of ocean waves parting against a pristine white hull. The camera glides in a smooth, continuous tracking shot across the polished teak wood deck of a multi-million-dollar luxury yacht. The late afternoon sun casts a warm golden glow over the crystal-clear azure waters of the coastline. The air is entirely free of the suffocating manufactured tension of Atlanta high society. Here, there are no flashing cameras, no whispered judgments, and no fraudulent empires to maintain. There is only the open sea and the quiet, undeniable certainty of true freedom. Isaiah is leaning against the polished silver railing. He looks healthier, younger, and more profoundly relaxed than he has in 30 long years. The heavy, crushing weight of Vivian's endless demands and petty cruelties has been completely lifted from his shoulders. He wears a crisp, unbuttoned white linen shirt, the ocean breeze ruffling his hair as he stares out at the endless horizon. He is no longer a shadow in his own home. He is a man who has finally reclaimed his life and his dignity. I step gracefully into the frame beside him, holding 2 crystal flutes filled with perfectly chilled vintage champagne. We do not need to speak about the wreckage we left behind in Georgia. We do not need to mention Marcus rotting in a federal cell, or Chloe hiding in a dilapidated apartment, or Vivian wandering the streets like a ghost of her former manufactured glory. The silence between my father and me is no longer fractured by fear or disappointment. It is full healing and absolute. I hand him one of the crystal flutes. He turns to me, a genuine, unburdened smile breaking across his face. It is a look of pure, unadulterated pride. We raise our hands and gently clink our glasses together. The sharp, clear chime of the crystal rings out like a victory bell over the open water, as the camera slowly pushes in, capturing the profound peace in our expressions. My voice carries over the scene in a calm, steady voiceover. They tell you that blood is thicker than water. They use that phrase to chain you, to force you to endure lifetimes of abuse and betrayal in the name of blind loyalty. But they forget a fundamental biological truth. Sometimes toxic blood must be completely drained so the body can survive. I did not destroy my family. I did not ruin their lives or steal their futures. I simply handed them a mirror so they could finally see their own hideous reflections. The sweetest revenge is not a screaming match. It is not a violent, destructive display of anger or a desperate plea for their validation. It is the absolute unbroken silence of you standing at the summit, knowing they will remain forever at the bottom. The tracking shot pulls back slowly, widening the frame to capture the 2 of us standing side by side, looking out over the vast, unconquered ocean. The bright blue sky begins to melt into a brilliant, fiery sunset, painting the clouds in deep, breathtaking strokes of gold, crimson, and violet. The luxury yacht sails effortlessly forward into the glowing light, leaving a perfect white wake behind it. The vibrant colors of the dusk hold on the screen for a long, triumphant moment, before slowly, peacefully fading to black.